The Galactic Coalition station hummed with controlled chaos. Medical Bay 7 received its latest wave of casualties from the Outer Rim conflict, and the air tasted of antiseptic ozone and something indefinable that came with wounds inflicted light years from home. Lieutenant Alara Cross stood in the center of it all, her emerald skin catching the harsh fluorescent lights, her navy hair pulled back in the tight regulation bun that still felt foreign after 3 weeks of practice. She was the first, the only Viridian in the entire Interstellar Medical Exchange program. Her people had observed humanity from a careful distance for 2 generations, studying their wars, their resilience, their strange capacity for both destruction and healing. Now Ilara stood among them, determined to prove that her species could contribute more than diplomatic observers and cultural attachés. The head nurse, a weathered woman named Diane with gray streaking through her auburn hair, thrust a data pad into Ilara's hands. Cross, you're on bed 12, Captain Garrett Steele. Severe traumatic brain injury from the ambush at Kepler Station. Unconscious for 72 hours. Standard post-trauma protocol. Ilara glanced at the chart. Human male, 38 standard years. Former combat medic instructor with the Texas Rangers Battalion. Multiple commendations. The scan images showed a spider web fracture across his skull, bleeding that had been controlled but not eliminated, swelling that pressed against tissue, responsible for memory, movement, identity itself. She approached bed 12 with the careful reverence her training demanded. The man lying there looked like he'd been carved from Texas granite and then broken against something harder. His hair was dark brown, almost black, with premature silver threading through at the temples. A strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, scars traced across his exposed shoulders, old marks from a life spent in harm's way. Even unconscious, even broken, he carried himself with a certain dignity that made Ilara's breath catch. She pulled on fresh gloves and gathered her supplies. Sponge bath protocol, basic care, nothing she hadn't done 100 times in training simulations. Except those simulations had used mannequins, not living men who radiated warmth and whose chests rose and fell with the steady rhythm of survival. Ilara filled the basin with warm water, added the prescribed amount of cleansing solution, and set to work. She moved methodically, professionally, washing the dried blood from his temple, the grime from his neck and shoulders. The human body was fascinating up close, different from Viridian physiology in subtle ways. The texture of his skin, the pattern of hair across his chest, the way his muscles maintained tone even in unconsciousness, as if his body refused to surrender completely. She worked downward, arms, torso, the defined ridges of his abdomen that spoke of a lifetime maintaining peak physical condition. Then lower still. Ilara pulled back the sheet with clinical detachment, exposing his legs. Standard procedure. Nothing to be embarrassed about. She was a medical professional, and this was simply anatomy. She ran the warm sponge along his right leg, then his left, working upward from ankle to knee to thigh. That was when she noticed it. Between his legs, something was happening. Something that definitely wasn't in her training materials. A swelling. Rapid. Pronounced. Growing more prominent with each passing second. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Her medical training kicked in immediately, running through differential diagnoses, inflammation, possibly allergic reaction to the cleansing solution, maybe a delayed response to medications, or worse, some kind of vascular emergency, blood pooling in response to the head trauma, a symptom of catastrophic system failure. The swelling continued. The human male's body seemed to be responding to some invisible stimulus, and Ilara's hands began to tremble. This was bad. This was very bad. She'd read about cascade failures in human physiology. How one system failure could trigger others, how quickly a stable patient could deteriorate. The swelling showed no signs of stopping. Panic seized her chest like a physical force. She'd been entrusted with this patient, this decorated soldier who'd given everything in service, and she was watching him decline right in front of her, and she didn't know what to do. Ilara slammed her palm against the emergency call button. Code Blue Bed 12, I need the crash cart, he's coding. The words tore from her throat with the force of absolute conviction. Alarms began to wail. Red lights strobed across the medical bay. The controlled chaos transformed into pure chaos as the emergency response team mobilized. Diane came running. Colonel Nathaniel Brennan, the chief medical officer, appeared with a speed that belied his 55 years. Two other nurses sprinted from opposite directions. The crash cart slammed against the foot of bed 12. They surrounded the bed. Colonel Brennan pulled back the sheet to assess the situation. He stared down at Captain Steele. Then he looked up at Alara. Then, to her absolute horror, he started laughing. Not a chuckle, not a polite cough of amusement, a full, deep belly laugh that echoed across the medical bay. Diane joined him, her hand pressed to her mouth, the tears forming at the corners of her eyes. The other nurses fought to control themselves, shoulders shaking with suppressed mirth. "Oh, honey," Diane managed between gasps. "Oh, sweet innocent honey." Alara felt heat flooding her cheeks. Viridian's embarrassment manifested as a deep purple flush that started at the neck and spread upward. She could feel it happening now, her skin darkening to the color of a bruised plum. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's happening to him? Is he dying?" Colonel Brennan wiped tears from his eyes and made a visible effort to compose himself. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair, cut military short, and the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. But he was smiling now. "Lieutenant Cross," he said, his Irish-American accent thickening with amusement, "that is not a code blue. That is what we call a perfectly normal biological response in human males." Alara blinked. "I don't—" "Morning glory," Diane supplied helpfully. "Little soldier standing at attention. The old rise and shine. Honey, that's not a medical emergency. That's just his body doing what healthy male bodies do." The purple flush intensified. Alara wanted the deck plates to open and eject her into the cold vacuum of space. "But I was just washing him. I didn't—" "Didn't need to do anything special," another nurse chimed in. "Sometimes it just happens. Especially with, well, let's just say Captain Steele is particularly well equipped in that department." More laughter. Someone made a joke about inflation versus inflammation. Alara stood frozen, her hands still gripping the sponge water dripping onto the deck. This couldn't be happening. Her first real patient. Her first chance to prove herself. And she just activated a station-wide emergency because she didn't know the basic facts about human male anatomy. Colonel Brennan killed the alarms with a wave of his hand. The red lights stopped strobing. The crash cart was wheeled away. The gathered medical personnel began to disperse, still chuckling, already forming the story into something that would be told and retold in the mess hall for weeks to come. Diane patted Alara's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Don't take it too hard, sweetie. We've all had our moments. Last year I thought a Taurian was having a cardiac event because I didn't know their hearts beat in syncopated rhythm. You live, you learn." "But I activated Code Blue for the entire bay," Alara whispered. "And you did it because you cared about your patient's well-being. That's not something to be ashamed of." Diane squeezed her shoulder once more. "Finish your work, Lieutenant, and next time you see that particular response, just know it means you're doing something right." She walked away, still smiling. Alara stood alone beside bed 12, looking down at Captain Garrett Steele. The swelling had subsided somewhat, though not entirely. His face remained peaceful, unaware of the humiliation he'd just caused her. She took a deep breath, then another. Then she picked up the sponge and finished the bath with shaking hands pointedly, not looking at anything below his waist. 3 days passed. 3 days in which Alara couldn't walk through Medical Bay 7 without encountering knowing smiles and barely suppressed laughter. 3 days in which she volunteered for every undesirable shift, every difficult patient, every task that would prove her competence, and maybe, just maybe, make people forget about the inflammatory incident. She was changing IV bags on bed 6 when Diane found her. "Cross, bed 12 is waking up." Alara's hands froze on the medication port. "Captain Steele, the very same. Colonel Brennan wants you there for the initial assessment." "Me, but You're his assigned nurse lieutenant, and between you and me, Brennan thinks you need to face this head-on. Pun absolutely intended." So Alara found herself walking toward bed 12, once more, her heart hammering against her ribs. A small crowd had gathered. Colonel Brennan stood at the bedside datapad in hand. 2 other nurses hovered nearby, ready to assist if the patient became disoriented or aggressive during emergence from unconsciousness. As Alara approached, Captain Steele's eyes fluttered open. They were blue. Not the pale blue of Earth's sky, but deeper. The blue of oceans she'd only seen in holos. Those eyes moved slowly, tracking across the ceiling, the medical equipment, the faces surrounding him. Then they found Alara and stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Alara felt pinned by that gaze, unable to look away, barely able to breathe. Then Captain Garrett Steele smiled. It was a weak smile, shadowed by pain and confusion, but genuine. "Well," he said, his voice rough from days of intubation, "if this is heaven, it's a lot more interesting than the preachers promised." His accent was pure Texas, warm and slow like honey. Colonel Brennan cleared his throat. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Captain. You've been unconscious for 6 days. You're aboard Galactic Coalition Station. Do you know your name? Garrett Steele, Captain, service number 77429 Charlie, Texas Rangers Battalion, Special Operations Medical Division." The words came automatically drilled into him through years of training. Then his brow furrowed. 6 days, the ambush at Kepler Station, I remember. Explosions. Johnson was hit. I was trying to reach him when something... He trailed off confused. "Explosive fragmentation," Brennan said. "Severe concussion, subdural hematoma, multiple fractures. You're very lucky to be alive." Steele's eyes drifted back to Alara. "Lucky seems like an understatement if I get to wake up looking at an angel." The purple flush started again. Alara fought it down with every ounce of willpower she possessed. "Lieutenant Alara Cross," she managed. "I'm your primary care nurse." "Viridian," Steele observed. His smile widened slightly. "First one I've met in person. You folks usually keep to yourselves." "I'm part of the medical exchange program." "Well then, Lieutenant Cross, I'm honored to be in your care." Colonel Brennan made a notation on his datapad. "I'll let you two get acquainted. Lieutenant Cross will handle your initial assessment and explain the recovery protocol." He fixed Alara with a meaningful look. "I'm sure she'll answer any questions you might have." He walked away before Alara could protest. The other nurses followed, leaving her alone with the waking patient. Steele watched her with those impossibly blue eyes. "So, Lieutenant Cross, what's the damage? And please be straight with me." "I was a combat medic for 12 years. I can handle the truth." Alara pulled up his chart, grateful for something to focus on besides his gaze. "The skull fracture is healing well. The hematoma has been reduced through medication, but there's still significant swelling in several regions of your brain. We won't know the full extent of any permanent damage until you've been through extensive testing." Translation: "I might not be able to fight again." She met his eyes. "That's a possibility. Yes." He absorbed this without flinching. "What else?" "You'll need physical therapy. Your motor control was affected by the injury. We'll start slow. Basic movements, coordination exercises, strength building. And you'll be handling that, if you're comfortable with that arrangement." Steele was quiet for a moment. Then, "Lieutenant Cross, I'm going to level with you. I overheard some of the nurses talking while I was swimming in and out. Something about an incident involving me and a code blue and a misunderstanding about human anatomy." The purple flush returned with a vengeance. "I see I've got the right story," he continued, and there was no mockery in his voice. Just gentle amusement. "Want to know something? My first year as a combat medic, I thought a Centauri soldier was dying because he turned bright blue. I called in the trauma team, activated emergency protocols, nearly started an interstellar incident. Turns out Centaurians turn blue when they laugh. He'd been telling jokes with his squad mates." Alara stared at him. "You're making that up to make me feel better." "Cross my heart. Ask Colonel Brennan if you don't believe me. He was the one who had to explain to the Centauri commander why we'd sedated one of their soldiers and prepped him for emergency surgery because we thought his laughter was respiratory failure." Despite herself, Alara felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. "That's horrifying. That's field medicine. You're going to make mistakes. The key is you made that mistake because you cared, because you thought I was in danger and you wanted to help. That kind of instinct, that kind of heart, that's not something they can teach in medical school." He shifted slightly in the bed, wincing. "So how about this? You help me learn to walk again, and I'll help you learn everything my 12 years as a combat medic can teach you. Fair trade." Alara looked at this man, this warrior who'd just woken from a potentially fatal injury and was offering to mentor her instead of resting. "Fair trade," she agreed. Over the following 2 weeks, Alara fell into a rhythm. She had other patients, other responsibilities, But 3 times a week, she dedicated her afternoon shift to Captain Steele's physical therapy. The first sessions were humbling for both of them. Steele, who'd been a special operations soldier, struggled to walk 10 feet without support. His left side remained weak, the neural pathways damaged by the injury. He gritted his teeth through the exercises, frustration evident in every movement. But he never complained. And between the exercises he taught, "Watch the patient's eyes," he said one afternoon as Alara helped him through balance drills. "Not just whether they're open or closed. Watch the micro movements." Rapid eye movement in an unconscious patient means their dreaming processing brain activity is strong. No REM, that's when you worry. Alara absorbed everything. How to read pain in patients who couldn't speak. How to prioritize in mass casualty situations. The difference between textbook medicine and battlefield medicine, where perfect wasn't possible, so good enough had to be good enough. "You've got talent," Steele told her during their second week. He was sitting on the edge of the therapy table, sweat beading on his forehead from the exertion. "Real talent, but you're afraid." "I'm not." "You are. You second-guess yourself. You hesitate before every decision, like you're waiting for permission to trust your own instincts." His blue eyes were serious now. "In combat medicine, hesitation kills. You need to trust yourself, Alara. Your training is solid. Your instincts are good. Stop being afraid of making mistakes." Easy for you to say. You're not the one who activated code blue for something you'd never encountered before and interpreted as a medical emergency. That's not a mistake. That's inexperience, and inexperience gets cured by experience. He paused. "You know what would have been a mistake? Ignoring it, assuming you knew what was happening when you didn't. You called for help. That's the right call every single time." Alara felt something shift in her chest. Permission, maybe, or absolution. After that conversation, she started volunteering for the difficult cases. The patients who screamed and fought against treatment. The ones with complex injuries that required creative solutions. And slowly, gradually, she felt her confidence growing. But something else was growing too. Something she didn't have a name for yet. It started with small things. The way her pulse quickened when she entered Steele's room. The way she found herself thinking about their conversations during her off hours. The way his smile seemed to light up something deep inside her that had nothing to do with professional admiration. The evening of week 3, day 2, Alara found herself in the station's library archive. It was late. Most of the crew was either on duty or in the recreation areas. The library occupied a forgotten corner of the station filled with physical books and data modules that hadn't been updated in years. She told herself she was looking for medical text, advanced neurology, physical therapy protocols, anything that might help her be a better nurse for Steele and her other patients. But her feet carried her past the medical section, deeper into the stacks to a corner marked Cultural Archives Earth Pre-Coalition Era. The box was small, unmarked, tucked behind a collection of outdated tactical manuals. Alara almost missed it, but something made her pull it from the shelf. Inside were books, old-fashioned paper books with worn covers and yellowed pages. Romance novels, she realized. Human romance novels from various eras. Some sweet and chaste, others decidedly not. At the bottom of the box, she found a slim volume titled A Comprehensive Guide to Human Intimacy and Sexuality. Alara glanced around. The library was empty. The security cameras in this section had been deactivated years ago, deemed unnecessary for protecting outdated cultural materials. She opened the book. The first chapter was titled Understanding Physical Responses. 3 hours later, Alara was still reading. Her cheeks had progressed from their normal emerald to a deep purple that would have alarmed anyone who saw her. The book was detailed, explicit, clinical in some sections, poetic in others. It explained the Morning Glory incident with mortifying clarity. But it also explained so much more. Human sexuality, she learned, wasn't just biological, it was psychological, emotional, tied to connection and attraction in ways that Viridian physiology simply didn't mirror. The book spoke of desire as something that could be awakened by touch, by words, by the mere presence of another person. She thought about Steele's hands, strong and scarred, the way his voice deepened when he was teaching her something important, the intensity of his focus when he looked at her, and she felt something deep in her core respond, a warmth, a hunger, something the book called arousal, but that felt like waking up from a long sleep into a world of vivid sensation. This was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't stop reading. The following afternoon, Alara arrived for Steele's therapy session carrying her datapad. Tucked discreetly in the datapad's memory was a copy of A Comprehensive Guide to Human Intimacy and Sexuality. She told herself it was for professional purposes, better understanding of her patients. Nothing more. They were halfway through the resistance training when Steele paused his eyes on her datapad. "Doing some light reading?" he asked. Alara followed his gaze. Horror flooded through her. The screen had activated, displaying the book's table of contents. Chapter titles like The Art of Seduction and Understanding Male Arousal were clearly visible. She fumbled with the device, shutting it off. "I was just research, for medical purposes, understanding human physiology better." Steele raised an eyebrow, but instead of mockery, she saw something else in his expression. Curiosity, maybe even approval. "Field research?" he asked, echoing Diane's earlier joke. "I want to be a better nurse. And you think reading about human intimacy will help with that?" Alara lifted her chin, defiant. "I think understanding all aspects of human biology, including sexuality, makes me more effective. I won't be caught off guard again." Steele was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right, nothing to be ashamed of wanting to understand your patients better. But Alara, can I tell you something?" She waited. "Those books, they'll teach you mechanics, biology, maybe even some psychology. But here's what they can't teach you. The most important thing about humans, about any species, really." He leaned forward slightly, and the movement brought him closer to her. "It's not just about the physical responses. It's about connection, trust, the feeling of being seen, really seen by another person. That's what makes the difference between just mechanics and something that matters." Their eyes locked. Alara's breath caught in her throat. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Steele asked softly. "I think so." "Good," he settled back. "Now shall we continue with these exercises? Because I'm determined to walk a full lap of this medical bay by end of week, and I need my slave driver of a therapist to make that happen." The moment broke. Alara laughed, helping him to his feet, but something had shifted between them. A line had been crossed, invisible but undeniable. That night, Alara lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling and admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She was attracted to Garrett Steele, not just professionally impressed, not just grateful for his mentorship. Attracted. The human word was desire, and it burned through her veins like starfire. It was impossible, inappropriate, potentially career-ending, and absolutely terrifyingly real. The exercise incident happened on week 3, day 5. They were working on Steele's lower body strength, deep squats while Alara provided stability support. He'd progressed remarkably well. The limp was almost gone. His coordination was returning. Colonel Brennan had even mentioned the possibility of medical clearance for light duty. "One more set." Alara encouraged, her hands on Steele's shoulders as he lowered into the squat. "You're doing great." "Easy for you to say," he grunted. "You're not the one whose legs are screaming." "Your legs are screaming because they're remembering how to be strong." "That's the worst motivational speech I've ever heard." She laughed. "Would you prefer feel the burn or no pain, no gain?" "I'd prefer a chair and a cold beer." He pushed up from the squat, but something went wrong. His left leg, still weaker than his right, buckled slightly. He lost balance. His hands shot out, grabbing for support, and caught Alara's arm. They went down together. The therapy mat cushioned their fall, but the impact still drove the air from Alara's lungs. She landed on her back. Steele landed on top of her, his weight pressing her into the mat, his face inches from hers. For a frozen moment, neither of them moved. Alara could feel everything. The heat of his body, the rapid beating of his heart against her chest. His breath on her face and lower pressed against her thigh, she felt the unmistakable evidence of his arousal. This time she knew exactly what it was. And this time the knowledge didn't cause panic. It caused something else entirely. Steele's eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. She watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I didn't mean to." "I know. I should get up." "Probably." But neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with electricity. Elara could feel her own body responding, warming opening to sensations she'd only read about in those forbidden books. Steele's gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there. Elara, the way he said her name, like a prayer, like a confession. She lifted her hand slowly and touched his cheek. His stubble was rough against her palm. His skin was warm. He closed his eyes at her touch, and she felt him tremble. Sir Lieutenant Cross, Colonel Brennan's voice shattered the moment like breaking glass. Steele rolled off her, immediately coming to his feet with surprising grace for someone who'd been struggling with basic motor control just minutes before. Elara scrambled up, smoothing her uniform, her face burning purple. Brennan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Am I interrupting?" "No, sir," Steele said quickly. "Lost my balance during the exercise. Lieutenant Cross broke my fall." "I see." Brennan's eyes moved between them, assessing. "Lieutenant Cross, a word in my office when you're finished here." He left. The door hissed shut behind him. Elara and Steele stood on opposite sides of the therapy mat, not looking at each other. "That was close," Steele said quietly. "Too close. Elara, we should talk about what just—" "No." She shook her head. "We shouldn't. I'm your nurse. You're my patient. That's all we can be." But even as she said the words, she knew they were a lie. 2 days later, on week 4 day, Elara made a decision that would change everything. She'd spent the previous day and night in agony trying to convince herself to stay away from Steele, to request a transfer to another patient, to do the professional, ethical thing. But she couldn't, because every time she closed her eyes, she felt him pressed against her, felt the heat of him, felt the wanting that had passed between them like an electrical current. The books in the library had described desire, but they hadn't prepared her for this hunger that consumed her thoughts, this need that made her question everything she'd been taught about proper boundaries and professional distance. She found herself in front of Steele's private room. Not the medical bay where he usually stayed, but the recovery quarters he'd been assigned now that he was mobile. It was late. The night shift was minimal. No one would see her enter. She knocked. "Come in." He was sitting on the edge of his bed, wearing regulation sleep pants and a tank top that showed the impressive musculature of his shoulders and arms. When he saw who it was, he stood quickly. "Elara, what are you doing here? If Brennan sees—" "I need to talk to you. It's nearly midnight." "I know what time it is." They stared at each other. Steele ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was nervous or uncertain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I know. This is dangerous for both of us." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The words burst out of her. "I've tried. I've told myself all the reasons this is impossible, all the ways it could destroy my career, my reputation, everything I've worked on, but none of it matters because I can't stop thinking about you, and I needed you to know that." Steele went very still. "Elara, you don't have to say anything. I just needed to tell you, and now I'll go, and we can pretend this conversation never happened." And he crossed the room in 3 strides. His hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their strength. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. "You think I don't feel it too?" he asked, his voice rough. "You think I haven't been going crazy trying to maintain boundaries when all I want is to pull you close and never let go?" "You have. From the moment I opened my eyes and saw you standing over my bed. Maybe even before that. Maybe I heard your voice while I was unconscious, and it became my anchor, my reason to fight back to consciousness." Garrett. His first name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. "This is going to be complicated," he warned. "I know. Brennan already suspects something. If we do this, we'll have to be careful. Secret." "I know. And there's a real chance it could end badly, for both of us." "I know." He smiled then, and it transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "Well, as long as you know what you're getting into." Then he kissed her. It was nothing like the romance novels described. It was better. It was electric and desperate and tender all at once. His lips were warm and demanding, and when her mouth opened under his, when his tongue touched hers, Elara felt something inside her unlock and bloom. She'd thought she understood desire from her research. But this was different. This was real, visceral, consuming. His hands slid into her hair, destroying her regulation bun. Her hands gripped his shoulders, feeling the muscles flex beneath her touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Steele rested his forehead against hers. "We can't undo this," he said. "I don't want to." "Neither do I." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "So what do we do now?" Alara took a deep breath. "Now we figure out how to make this work. Together." And despite all the dangers, all the complications, all the very real possibility of disaster, she smiled. Because for the first time since arriving at Galactic Coalition Station, Lieutenant Alara Cross felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The thing about secrets, Alara discovered, was that they changed the taste of air. Week 5 began with new protocols. They established rules in the darkness of Garrett's quarters, speaking in whispers, though the walls were soundproofed. Only meet during off-duty hours. Maintain absolute professionalism in public spaces. Patient care comes first, always, no exceptions. Alara threw herself into work with a ferocity that surprised even Colonel Brennan. She volunteered for the trauma cases no one else wanted. The screamer in bed 4 who'd lost both legs and couldn't accept it yet. The Taurian with the syncopated heartbeat whose physiology required constant monitoring. The burn victim in isolation whose pain medication had to be precisely calibrated every 6 hours. She learned. She grew. She made decisions without second-guessing, trusting the instincts Garrett had told her to believe in. During a mass casualty drill in week 6, she ran triage on 40 simulated patients in under 20 minutes, making calls that would save the maximum number of lives. Colonel Brennan watched from the observation deck, his expression unreadable. When the drill ended, he pulled her aside. "That was exceptional work, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir. You've changed since you arrived. More confident, more decisive." His gray eyes studied her face. "Captain Steele has been good for your professional development." The words were innocent. The look in his eyes was not. "Yes, sir. He's an excellent teacher." "Indeed." Brennan paused. "Just remember, Lieutenant, in this line of work, we have to be very careful about the boundaries we maintain, for everyone's protection." "I understand, sir." But she didn't think he knew. Not really. Not yet. The therapy sessions continued 3 times a week. Garrett's recovery progressed remarkably. The limp vanished. His coordination returned to near-perfect levels. By week 7, he could run a full kilometer on the treadmill without assistance. But the sessions had become something more than physical therapy. "Field medicine isn't just about fixing bodies," Garrett explained one afternoon. They were alone in the therapy room, the door locked, officially working on advanced rehabilitation techniques. In reality, he was teaching her combat triage protocols that wouldn't be in any civilian medical textbook. When you're under fire, you've got maybe 30 seconds to decide who lives and who dies. You can't save everyone, so you save who you can and you make peace with the rest. His hands demonstrated a pressure point technique on her arm, professional and clinical. But his thumb traced small circles on her inner wrist, and that was anything but professional. "How do you make peace with it?" Alara asked. "You remember that every person you save is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone who gets to go home because you made the hard call." His blue eyes met hers. "You remember that the people you couldn't save, they wouldn't want you to carry that weight. They'd want you to use what you learned to save the next one." She understood he wasn't just talking about combat medicine. The nights were different. The nights were theirs. Alara would wait until the station's night cycle reached its deepest hours, when the corridors were empty and the skeleton crew was focused on monitoring stations, not wandering medical personnel. She would slip into Garrett's quarters, and for a few stolen hours, they would exist in a world where regulations didn't matter. Sometimes they talked. He told her about growing up on a ranch outside Austin, about learning to set broken bones on cattle, before he ever touched a human patient, about the moment he realized he was better at saving lives than taking them, and decided to become a medic instead of a shooter. She told him about Viridian, about the suffocating expectations of her family's diplomatic legacy, about choosing medicine as her own form of rebellion, about being terrified and exhilarated in equal measure to be the first of her kind in a human-dominated field. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They explored each other with the careful intensity of scientists discovering new worlds. Learning what touch made the other bow, what words whispered in darkness could unravel control. The geography of scars and sensitive skin, the language of bodies speaking truths that mouths couldn't risk saying aloud. Garrett was a patient teacher in this too. Careful, attentive, making sure she understood every step, that every boundary crossed was one she chose to cross. "I've never done this before," she admitted one night in week 7, her head on his chest, listening to the steady drum of his human heart. "Not like this. Viridians don't. We don't approach intimacy the same way." "Neither have I," he said, and she lifted her head to look at him skeptically. "You're telling me you've never—" "I've had encounters, relationships even, but this—" His hand came up to cup her face. "Being with someone where every touch feels like coming home, where I want to know everything about you, not just your body, but your mind, your dreams, the way you think." He shook his head. "Never like this." She kissed him, then pouring into it everything she couldn't say in the daylight hours. Week 7, night 3 brought the role play. Alara had been thinking about it for days, ever since she'd stumbled across a passage in one of those forbidden romance novels. The chapter had described a fantasy scenario, playful and sensual, where power dynamics shifted and normal roles dissolved into something more primal. She'd been terrified to suggest it, but Garrett had told her that vulnerability was strength and trust was the foundation of everything that mattered. So she prepared. She modified her standard medical uniform slightly. Nothing obvious enough to be noticed in public, but enough to transform it in private. The neckline a fraction lower, the fit a degree tighter. She practiced in the mirror of her quarters, feeling ridiculous and powerful in turns. When she entered Garrett's room that night, his reaction told her everything she needed to know. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, and he froze when he saw her. His eyes went dark, pupils dilating, and she watched his throat work as he swallowed. "Lieutenant Cross," he said, his voice already rough. "This is unexpected." She locked the door behind her with deliberate slowness. "Good evening, Captain Steele. I'm here for your evening assessment." "My assessment?" "Mm-hmm. There have been reports of elevated heart rate, increased blood pressure, irregular breathing patterns." She crossed to him, her movements calculated. "I need to conduct a thorough examination." Garrett leaned back on his hands, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is that your professional medical opinion, Lieutenant?" "It is." She stood directly in front of him now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "And as your primary care provider, I'm afraid I must insist on your full cooperation." "Well," he drawled, his Texas accent thickening, "I do aim to be a cooperative patient." "Excellent. Then I need you to follow my instructions exactly." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palm. "Can you do that for me, Captain?" "Yes, ma'am." The game continued. She examined him with clinical precision that gradually dissolved into something far more intimate. He played his role perfectly, the obedient patient following orders until she gave him permission to touch her, and then the role shattered entirely into desperate need and gasping laughter, and the kind of connection that transcended any fantasy they might have scripted. Afterward, tangled together in sheets that smelled of them both, Garrett traced patterns on her shoulder. "Where did that come from?" he asked, wonder in his voice. "Research," she said primly. "I told you I was committed to understanding human intimacy." "Remind me to thank whoever wrote that particular textbook." She laughed, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. But even as they lay there, wrapped in their private universe, Laura couldn't quite silence the voice whispering that every perfect moment they stole was one more step closer to discovery, to consequences neither of them could avoid forever. Week 8, day 1 brought the summons. Commander Victoria Blackwood's office occupied a corner of the station's command level, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the starfield beyond. Blackwood herself matched the aesthetic, tall, angular, with steel-gray hair cut in a severe bob, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail without revealing a single thought. Alara had met her only twice before, once during initial orientation and once during a mandatory medical review. Both times Blackwood had been professionally cordial and utterly impenetrable. Now standing in that austere office, Alara felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Blackwood didn't waste time on pleasantries. She tapped a control on her desk, and a holographic display materialized between them. A document, an official report. "Do you know what this is, Lieutenant Cross?" Alara's mouth went dry. "No, ma'am." "It's an anonymous report filed 3 days ago with medical oversight. It alleges inappropriate conduct between yourself and Captain Garrett Steele." Blackwood's eyes were ice. It includes detailed observations, times, locations, the duration of your therapy sessions compared to standard protocols, even speculation about the nature of your relationship. The world tilted. Alara gripped the edge of Blackwood's desk to steady herself. I can explain, can you? Blackwood leaned back in her chair. Because from where I'm sitting, Lieutenant, there are two possibilities. Either these allegations are completely fabricated, in which case we have a serious problem with malicious reporting, or they're accurate, in which case we have a different problem entirely. Commander let me be very clear about what's at stake here. Blackwood's voice could have cut steel. If you are found to have engaged in an intimate relationship with a patient under your direct care, you will be immediately discharged from the Interstellar Medical Exchange Program. You will be banned from practicing medicine on any coalition facility. And because this is a diplomatic program, the consequences will extend beyond your personal career. Your family on Viridian will be investigated. Your people's participation in future exchange programs will be questioned. You will become the example of why such programs fail. Alara couldn't breathe. She thought of her father, of the pride in his eyes when she'd been selected for this program despite his disappointment that she'd chosen medicine over diplomacy. She thought of her mother's quiet support, of her younger sister who looked up to her as proof that Viridians could succeed anywhere. All of it destroyed. However, Blackwood continued, and something in her voice made Alara look up. I'm prepared to offer you a way out. She tapped another control. The anonymous report disappeared, replaced by a new document. Medical Station Epsilon. They've requested a chief nurse for their trauma division. It's a prestigious position, a significant advancement. And most importantly, it's on the other side of coalition space. Blackwood met Alara's eyes. Accept this transfer effective immediately, and the anonymous report disappears. Your record remains clean. Your family's reputation intact. Your career trajectory actually improves. Immediately, you would leave within 72 hours. 72 hours and 3 days. Not even enough time to say goodbye properly to Garrett. Certainly not enough time to explain a plan to find another way. Alara stared at the transfer orders. Everything she'd worked for handed to her on a silver platter. All she had to do was walk away. Leave Garrett behind. Pretend these weeks had never happened. And if I refuse, the words came out steadier than she felt. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Then Colonel Brennan's investigation continues. And if he finds evidence supporting these allegations, the consequences I outlined become reality. I need time to think. You have 24 hours to decide. Blackwood stood, indicating the meeting was over. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, you've done exceptional work here. Whatever you decide, that's something to be proud of. Alara left the office in a daze. She made it back to her quarters before the shaking started. She sat on her bunk, staring at nothing, trying to force her mind to work through the problem logically. Accept the transfer. Save her career. Protect her family. Move forward with the life she'd planned before Garrett Steele had opened his blue eyes and smiled at her like she was something precious. Or refuse. Stay here. Fight for a relationship that might be doomed anyway. Risk everything she'd worked for on the chance that love could somehow be enough. She thought about Garrett's words, about trusting her instincts, about bold action with good intent. She thought about the woman she'd become these past weeks, confident, decisive, unwilling to back down from difficult choices. And she made her decision. 20 hours later, Alara stood in Commander Blackwood's office once more. I'm refusing the transfer, ma'am. Blackwood set down the datapad she'd been reading. You understand what that means? Yes, ma'am. You're willing to risk your career, your family's reputation, your entire future to stay on this station. Alara lifted her chin. I'm not refusing because of Captain Steele. I'm refusing because I don't abandon my patients. I have 12 people under my care right now who depend on me. Leaving them with 3 days' notice wouldn't just be unprofessional. It would be a betrayal of everything medicine is supposed to stand for. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Then impossibly, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. Interesting answer, Lieutenant. Dismissed. That night, Alara told Garrett everything. They sat on his bed, not touching, the weight of reality pressing down on them. You should have taken the transfer, he said, his voice hollow. Don't tell me what I should have done. Alara, this is your career, your family, everything you've worked for. And what about us? What about what we've built here? We've had a few weeks. That's not worth destroying your life over. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Don't do that. Don't diminish what this is because you're scared. I made my choice with full knowledge of the consequences. Respect that. I can't be the reason you lose everything. You're not. I am. My choice. My consequences. She softened slightly. We knew this wouldn't be easy. We just have to be more careful. He pulled her close, then holding her like she might disappear. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. They held each other through the night, neither of them sleeping much, both knowing that the hardest part was still ahead. Week 8, day 4 shattered what little peace they'd found. Alara was finishing her shift when the alarm started. Not the code blue she'd mistakenly triggered weeks ago. Something worse. The seizure protocol alarm indicating a patient in active neurological crisis. Her datapad lit up with the location. Private quarters. Garrett's room. She ran. Regulations protocol maintaining professional distance, none of it mattered. She sprinted through corridors, her heart hammering against her ribs, terror clawing up her throat. She reached his room to find him on the floor convulsing violently. Blood trickled from where he'd bitten his tongue. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Training took over. She grabbed emergency supplies from the hallway medical kit, rolled him onto his side, protected his head from further impact. Called for the trauma team while monitoring his breathing, counting the seconds. Watching for the moment the seizure would stop. It didn't stop. 60 seconds. 90. 2 minutes. Status epilepticus. Life-threatening. The trauma team arrived. Colonel Brennan took one look at the situation and started barking orders. They got IV access, administered anti-seizure medications, but Garrett kept convulsing. They transported him to the medical bay, Alara, running alongside the gurney, still maintaining airway protection, even as medics tried to wave her off. In the surgical suite, scans revealed the truth. The brain fragment from his original injury had shifted, creating pressure, triggering cascading electrical storms that wouldn't stop until the pressure was relieved. He needs surgery, the neurosurgeon said, studying the scans. Immediately, but I can't get here for at least 6 hours. Storm system between here and Medical Station Delta has all transport grounded. Colonel Brennan's face went gray. He won't last 6 hours. Then we need to operate now. With what surgeon? You're the only neurosurgeon on this station and you can't get here. I can talk someone through it remotely, but whoever does it will be operating blind on the most delicate tissue in the human body with nothing but voice instructions from a hologram. Brennan looked around the room. His eyes landed on Alara. She knew what he was going to ask before he said it. Lieutenant Cross, you have the most surgical experience of anyone here. Captain Steele has taught you field protocols, and you know his specific physiology better than any of us. He paused. I need you to assist on this surgery. Alara looked at Garrett, still seizing despite maximum medication. Dying in front of her. She thought about all the reasons she should refuse. Her lack of training, the conflict of interest, the fact that her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold a datapad. Then she thought about what Garrett had taught her. Trust your instincts. Bold action with good intent. Save who you can. I'll do it, she said. The next 8 hours existed outside of time. The remote surgeon walked her through every step, opening the skull, identifying the fragment, the delicate work of removal without damaging surrounding tissue. Alara's hands moved with a precision she didn't know she possessed. Every lesson Garrett had taught her, every principle she'd learned, crystallized in this moment. Colonel Brennan assisted, and she was distantly aware of his steady presence, his quiet competence supporting her through the impossible. Complications arose. Bleeding that wouldn't stop. Swelling that threatened to undo all their progress. Twice, Garrett's heart rate dropped dangerously low. Each time, Alara made calls that pushed the boundaries of the surgeon's instructions, trusting the instincts Garrett had told her to believe in. You're doing something the textbooks wouldn't teach, the remote surgeon observed during hour 6. But it's working. Trust yourself, Lieutenant. Finally, after 8 hours and 43 minutes, the fragment was removed, the bleeding controlled, the swelling reduced. They closed him up with meticulous care. When it was over, Alara stood at the scrub sink watching pink water swirl down the drain and realized she was crying. Silent tears that wouldn't stop. Colonel Brennan appeared beside her. He didn't say anything, just handed her a towel and stood there in solidarity while she fell apart. "You saved his life," he said eventually. "I had to." The words came out broken. "I couldn't let him die." "I know." Brennan's voice was gentle in a way she'd never heard from him. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. He's going to need you when he wakes up." If he wakes up, Alara thought. But she didn't say it. Garrett didn't wake up. Not that day, not the next. Week 9 brought a new kind of hell. The surgery had been successful by all medical metrics. No infection, no additional swelling. Brain activity normal. But Garrett remained unconscious, locked in some place where she couldn't follow. Alara sat vigil every night. The nurses looked the other way. Colonel Brennan actively encouraged it. The anonymous report, the transfer offer, all of it seemed distant and unimportant in the face of Garrett's stillness. She talked to him, told him about her day, about the patients she'd treated, about the young Centauri who'd asked her how she managed to be so brave and how she'd almost laughed because she didn't feel brave at all. She felt terrified every single moment. "You told me to trust my instincts," she whispered on night 7, holding his hand. "But my instincts are screaming that I can't do this without you, that I need you to wake up and tell me I did the right thing, that you're proud of me, that we're going to be okay." His fingers twitched in her grasp. Alara's head snapped up. Garrett, his eyes moved beneath closed lids. Rapid eye movement. He was dreaming. "Come back to me," she pleaded. "I know it's easier to stay in the darkness. I know the world is going to be hard when you wake up. But I need you here, please." Nothing. Just the steady beep of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. She stayed anyway. Week 10, day 2, 03:47 hours. Garrett's eyes open. Alara had dozed off in the chair beside his bed, her head on the mattress near his hand. His movement woke her. For a moment, they just stared at each other. His eyes were confused, unfocused, but aware. Aware was enough. "Hey, darling," he rasped, his voice wrecked from the intubation. Alara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She just gripped his hand tighter. "They told me," he continued, struggling with each word, "while I was out. I heard voices. They said you saved me, that you operated, that you risked everything." "I had to." "You could have lost your career, your license, everything." "I know." "Why?" She found her voice finally. "Because losing you would be losing everything that matters. Career, license, reputation, all of it is just noise without you." A tear slid down his cheek. "I love you, Alara Cross. I should have said it before. I love you. I love you too." She kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his lips. "I love you so much." The moment was perfect. Fragile and perfect. It lasted 5 days. Week 10. Day 7 brought the orders. Every recovered soldier on the station received them simultaneously. Emergency recall to active duty. The situation at the outer rim had deteriorated catastrophically. Coalition forces were being pushed back on multiple fronts. Every able-bodied soldier with combat experience was needed immediately. Garrett was on the list. Alara found him in his recovery room, staring at the orders on his datapad. "You can't," she said. "You're barely out of bed. You had brain surgery 10 days ago." "I passed the medical clearance." "Barely. Garrett, you're not ready, physically or psychologically." "Doesn't matter, the orders aren't a request." She grabbed the datapad from him. "Then I'll say you're not ready. I'm your primary care physician. I can keep you grounded." "No, you can't. These are military orders, Alara. Medical recommendations don't override them." She knew he was right, but she also knew that sending him back to combat in his current state was a death sentence. An idea formed. Terrible. Unethical. Potentially criminal. She could falsify his medical records, add complications that didn't exist, make it look like his recovery was failing. No one would question her judgment after she'd successfully operated on him. It would keep him safe. It would also destroy the last shreds of her integrity, and if discovered, would result in court-martial for both of them. That night, alone in her quarters, Alara pulled up Garrett's medical file. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. One entry, one small alteration to the neurological assessment. That's all it would take. She thought about what Garrett had taught her, about making hard calls, about saving who you could. She started typing. The door to her quarters opened. Garrett stood there, having apparently overridden the lock somehow. "Don't," he said. "I didn't. I know what you were thinking. I know you, Alara, and I'm telling you don't. You'll die out there." "Maybe. Probably not. I'm good at what I do. But even if I do, that's my choice, my risk. You can't take that from me. I can't lose you." He crossed to her, took the datapad from her hands, deleted whatever she'd started to type. "You won't lose me. I'm coming back. I promise you that." "You can't promise that. No one can." "Then let me promise this. If you falsify those records, if you break your integrity to keep me safe, I won't be able to live with myself. I need you to be the woman I fell in love with. The one who makes the hard calls, who trusts her instincts, who doesn't compromise her principles even for me." Alara felt something break inside her chest. Because he was right. Because she knew he was right. And because knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow, 0600 hours. "Then we have tonight." They spent it wrapped around each other, not sleeping, not talking much, just being together. Memorizing the feel of each other, building a memory strong enough to survive separation. At 0530 hours, Alara walked with Garrett to the transport bay. They maintained careful distance, professional and proper. Just a nurse seeing off a recovered patient. At the airlock, he turned to her. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her anyway, regulations be damned. Instead, he took her hand and pressed something into it. She looked down. A locket. Simple silver with an inscription on the back. "Come back to me." "Always," he said quietly. Then he was gone. The airlock sealed. The transport departed. Alara stood there long after it disappeared from the view screen, the locket clutched in her fist, and made a promise of her own. She would be here when he returned, no matter what it was, no matter what she had to sacrifice. She would be here. The first week without Garrett felt like learning to breathe underwater. Alara moved through her shifts with mechanical precision, treating patients, making rounds, maintaining the professional excellence that had become her armor. But the nights were impossible. She would lie in her quarters staring at the locket he'd given her and wonder if he was alive, if he was scared, if he thought about her with even a fraction of the desperate intensity she thought about him. By week 11, she stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. Colonel Brennan noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "Lieutenant, crossed my office." She followed him, expecting reprimand. Instead, he gestured to a chair and sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "You're running yourself into the ground." "I'm maintaining my duties, sir." "You're exceeding your duties. You've logged more hours than any other nurse on this station. You've taken on cases that should be handled by senior staff. You volunteered to train the new Tarian medical exchange student, even though you barely have time to eat." He leaned forward. "You're trying to outrun something, Lieutenant, and it's not going to work." Alara met his eyes. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Granted. What am I supposed to do? Sit around and worry? Wait for a casualty report with his name on it? At least when I'm working, I'm useful. At least I'm saving someone." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. "After my wife died, I did the same thing. Worked 18, 20-hour days. Convinced myself that if I just stayed busy enough, the grief couldn't catch me." He paused. "It caught me anyway. Nearly destroyed me in the process." "How did you survive it?" "I didn't, not for a long time. But eventually I learned that running from pain doesn't make you strong. Facing it does, letting yourself feel it, and choosing to keep going anyway. That's courage." Alara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't feel very courageous." "The bravest people never do." He stood. "Take the next 2 days off. That's an order, Lieutenant. Rest. Process. Let yourself be human for 48 hours. She wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded. Those 2 days nearly broke her. Without work to distract her, the fear came rushing in. She found herself checking casualty reports obsessively, reading and rereading the brief sanitized updates from the Outer Rim that told her nothing except that the fighting was brutal and the losses were mounting. On the second night, she finally let herself cry. Great racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for Garrett for the future they might never have, for the woman she'd been before she learned what it meant to love someone so completely that their absence left a wound that wouldn't close. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, empty, but also somehow lighter. Week 13 brought in watching Alara work with a patient who'd lost his arm in a training accident and was struggling to accept the prosthetic replacement. When Alara finished encouraging the young man through his first successful manipulation of the mechanical fingers, Blackwood approached. "Walk with me, Lieutenant." They moved through the corridors in silence until Blackwood led them to an observation deck Alara had never visited. The viewport here showed an unobstructed view of deep space stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet. "I have an offer for you," Blackwood said without preamble. "Medical Station Epsilon, Chief Nurse Trauma Division. Same position I offered before." Alara's stomach dropped. "I already refused that transfer, ma'am." "This isn't a transfer. It's a promotion. A significant one. You'd be overseeing a staff of 40 managing critical care for 3 sectors, making decisions that would impact thousands of lives." Blackwood turned to face her. "And this time there are no strings attached. No ultimatums, no investigations. Just a genuine offer based on your exceptional performance these past months." "I don't understand." "You've proven yourself, Lieutenant Cross, not just as a nurse, but as a leader. The way you handled that surgery on Captain Steele alone with just remote guidance should have been impossible. But you made it work. You trusted your training and your instincts, and you saved a man's life against overwhelming odds." Alara stared out at the stars. This was everything she'd dreamed of. Recognition, advancement, the chance to make a real difference on a scale she'd never imagined possible. And all she'd have to do was leave behind the place where Garrett might return, if he returned. "Can I have time to think about it?" she asked. Of course, but Alara Blackwood's use of her first name startled her. "Don't make this decision based on someone else. Make it based on what you want, what you need. Your life, your choice." After Blackwood left, Alara stood at the viewport for a long time. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at this station, terrified of mistakes, desperate to prove herself, willing to accept humiliation if it meant eventually earning respect. She thought about the woman she'd become, confident, capable, someone who could make impossible calls in impossible situations. Garrett had helped forge that transformation, but he hadn't created it. The strength had been in her all along. He'd just shown her how to access it. And that strength didn't depend on his presence. It was hers. It would be hers wherever she went, whatever she chose. She was still thinking 3 days later when the alarm started screaming. Week 14, day 5, 16:47 hours. Incoming medical emergency. Critical casualties. Transport approaching from the outer rim, requesting immediate trauma response. Alara was already moving, pulling on her emergency response gear, her mind shifting into the focused clarity that came with crisis. Colonel Brennan appeared beside her. "Multiple critical injuries," he said tersely. "Ambush in the Kepler system. Heavy losses. The transport has 3 priority 1 cases who won't survive transfer to a larger facility." They reached the docking bay as the transport sealed with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The doors opened. Medics rushed forward with gurneys. The first patient was missing both legs below the knee, unconscious, already receiving blood transfusions. The second had burns covering 60% of his body. The third, Alara's world stopped. Garrett lay on the stretcher, his uniform soaked with blood. His face was pale, almost gray. A massive wound in his chest had been packed with field dressings, but blood still seeped through. The medic doing compressions looked exhausted and terrified. "Shrapnel to the chest," the medic gasped. "Punctured lung, possible cardiac involvement. Lost him twice already, brought him back both times. But he's not going to make it to surgery if we don't." Alara moved on pure instinct. "Get him to surgical suite 1. Now, page every available surgeon. I want blood products standing by and a cardiac specialist on hologram." "Lieutenant, you can't be his surgeon," someone said. "Conflict of interest, Mo." "I'm not asking permission." She looked at Colonel Brennan. "Sir, with respect, I'm the only one here who can do this. I know his anatomy. I've operated on him before, and I will not let him die because we're worried about regulations. Brennan stared at her for one endless moment. Then he nodded. Sweet one, I'll assist. Everyone else move. They moved. The surgery was brutal from the first incision. The shrapnel had torn through Garrett's chest cavity like shredded metal claws. His right lung was collapsed. The pericardium, the sac surrounding his heart, was perforated. Blood filled spaces where it shouldn't be, obscuring everything, making every movement a gamble. We need to evacuate this blood before we can even assess the damage, the cardiac specialist said from his holographic projection. His name was Dr. Rourke, and he'd performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries. But if you nick the wrong vessel while suctioning... I know, Alara said. Her hands were steady despite the terror screaming through her veins. Walking me through it, doctor. She worked with a precision that transcended training. Every movement deliberate, every decision calculated. When the suction revealed the extent of the damage, even Dr. Rourke drew in a sharp breath. That's extensive, Lieutenant. I'm going to be honest. His odds are maybe 20%. Even if we get the bleeding, controlled the trauma to the heart muscle, the contamination, the time he's been in shock, then we work with 20%, Alara said. Colonel Brennan, I need better visualization here. They worked through the night, hours blurred together. Twice Garrett's heart stopped beating. Twice Alara's hands brought him back, massaging the muscle, directly refusing to let it quit. You don't get to ding, she told him, knowing he couldn't hear, not caring. You promised you'd come back. You don't break promises to me, Garrett Steele. Around hour 10, they hit a crisis point, bleeding from a vessel they couldn't identify, blood pressure dropping. No time for careful digestion. You need to clamp blindly, Dr. Rourke said, his voice tight. Best guess where the bleeder is and clamp. You might save him. You might kill him. But if you don't do something in the next 60 seconds, he's gone anyway. Alara closed her eyes, remembered Garrett teaching her about combat medicine, about making the hard calls, about trusting instinct when knowledge failed. She opened her eyes and placed the clamp. The bleeding stopped. Good God, Dr. Rourke breathed. That was perfect. How did you know? I didn't. I trusted. They continued, repairing damage, removing shrapnel, reconstructing tissue that had been shredded into something that could function, could heal, could sustain life. 14 hours and 27 minutes after the first incision, they closed his chest. Garrett Steele was alive. Barely, but alive. Alara stripped off her gloves in the scrub room and realized her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unfasten her surgical gown. Colonel Brennan appeared beside her. You did it, he said quietly. We did it. No, Lieutenant. That was all you. I assisted. But every critical call, every impossible decision, that was you trusting yourself. He paused. He's going to have a long recovery. The damage was severe. He may never... I know. She did know. The scans had shown the extent of it. Permanent disability, end of his combat career. For a man who'd defined himself by his ability to fight to protect this, would be its own kind of death. But he'd be alive. And that was enough. The next 2 weeks were hell. Garrett survived the surgery. He survived the infection that set in on day 3. He survived the cardiac arrest on day 5 that had everyone convinced he was finally out of chances. But he didn't wake up. Week 15 became week 16. Alara maintained her vigil, maintained her work, maintained the belief that somewhere in the darkness Garrett was fighting his way back. Colonel Brennan found her on week 16, day 6. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood needs your answer about the Epsilon position. Alara hadn't thought about the offer in weeks. It seemed to belong to a different lifetime. I'm staying here, she said. Are you sure this is a remarkable opportunity? I'm sure. She looked at Garrett's unconscious face. My place is here. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Then, he'd want you to take it, you know. If he could speak, he'd tell you not to give up your future for him. Then it's a good thing he can't speak. Alara managed a smile. Besides, this isn't just about him. I have patients here, a team that depends on me. Work that matters. Why would I leave that? It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Week 17, day 1, 03:24 hours. Alara was dozing in the chair beside Garrett's bed when his hand moved in hers. She jerked awake. His eyes were open, focused, aware. Hey, darling, he whispered. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe, just held his hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Don't cry," he said, his voice rough and broken. "I kept my promise. I came back." "You almost didn't." "Almost doesn't count." He tried to smile. Failed. "How bad is it?" She could have lied, could have softened it, but he taught her better than that. "Bad. The shrapnel damaged your heart. You'll be on medication for the rest of your life. Your lung capacity is reduced. You'll never pass the physical requirements for combat deployment again." He absorbed this without flinching. "So my career is over." "Your military career, yes." "Then what am I supposed to do? I'm a soldier, Ilara. That's all I've ever been." "No, you're a healer, a teacher, a man who taught me that strength isn't about what we can do, but who we are." She leaned closer. "You saved my life, Garrett. Not on an operating table. But you saved me. Showed me how to be brave, how to trust myself, how to love without holding back. That's who you are. That's what you do. I don't know how to be anything else. Then we'll figure it out, together." The recovery was brutal. Garrett fell into a depression that terrified Ilara more than the physical wounds had. He'd always been the strong one, the mentor, the man who knew what to do in any situation. Now he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, barely speaking, refusing therapy. Week 18 brought the breaking point. Ilara found him trying to get out of bed on his own, determined to prove he could still move, still function. He collapsed. She caught him before he hit the floor, and he broke down in her arms. "I'm useless," he sobbed. "Can't fight. Can barely walk. What good am I to anyone?" "You're everything to me," she said fiercely. "Everything, and I won't let you give up. You taught me courage, Garrett Steele. Now let me teach it back to you." Slowly, painfully, she became his strength. She showed up every day, pushed him through physical therapy even when he wanted to quit, celebrated tiny victories, walking to the bathroom unassisted, eating a full meal, making it through a night without nightmares. "You were right," he said one day in week 20. They were in the